Hi, everybody. Welcome to the GenoCare podcast. We're in for a treat today because we have a real guru in prenatal diagnosis joining us. So I'd like to welcome Pieta Shakes, who is the founder and volunteer executive director of Through the Unexpected. She's also a credentialed mental health nurse and a teaching and research academic with James Cook University. So welcome, Pieta.
Hello. Thank you for the guru title. I might have to use that somewhere, but
No, I think you deserve it. So I guess just to get started, I know you well now. We've collaborated on a few different things, but just for our audience, can you share a bit about your background and how you came to work in this space? And I guess most importantly, what drew you to advocating for better support for people around prenatal diagnosis?
yeah, I guess my work in this space starts with lived experience, very much
Mhm.
founded and inspired by lived experience. The fact that I received unexpected news about the way my baby's brain was developing 31 weeks pregnant, when I was well and truly past all of those points where people suggest that such unexpected news can even pop up. And at that stage, I read the results on the paper myself and had to self-refer to fetal medicine and leave a message on a phone. And then when I spoke to the team, there was an assumption that I would automatically terminate and tell everybody that I had a stillbirth, and just these layers of complexities that occurred with that whole experience. 5 weeks of decision making and hating myself and everything that was happening, and then continuing pregnancy and feeling completely isolated and not knowing how to shift in this space of or exist in this space where you're doing mothers groups and talking about milestones of babies and sitting there going, I don't know if my baby's going to live or die or ever going to crawl or do all these things that you're talking about. It's just such an isolating and, I don't know, traumatic experience it was for me personally. And I just moved on the best that we can, as we do, despite being a mental health nurse. And I reached out to the supports that I could try and find, and there really wasn't much. I went and saw a psychologist who just didn't mesh at the same time, because I guess I was looking for a bit of hope at that point, and it was very much a sort of the questioning and where our conversation went was very much in that sort of deficit risk, all of these negativity, and it just didn't gel with what I needed at the time. So I threw that in and then just tried to get on with life. And I was still working as a mental health nurse, and then started working with parents in the perinatal period and would start to be referred people who had experienced unexpected news. And this sort of piqued my interest a little bit. It wasn't just me. And then
Mm,
when it came to doing my PhD, somewhat 8 years down the line, I thought, oh, I want to look at this further. And it wasn't really until I started looking at the literature and I was like, oh my God, there's 20 years of research, internationally largely, that has shown that parents who experience such unexpected news in pregnancy have these really poor psychosocial outcomes. It's not just the distress or the shock at the time, it's like things that they carry well and truly down the line, and how the experience of parenting, identity, family, all of these things are thrown into question with this unexpected news. So with that research, then I thought, what are we doing in Australia? Surely now, like my experience was 8 years before that. Surely
mm,
now we're doing this better. So I rang like the parenting, pregnancy, parenting and beyond parent, pregnancy, birth and parent, with some kind of helpline that was around
mm.
then. And thought, okay, so what are you doing now if someone rings in distress because they've just received this sort of news? And the person on the line said, oh gosh, I don't know. I guess we just refer them to Lifeline. And I was like, that's it. No, that's not enough. So while I was doing my PhD, and much to the disgust of my supervisors who were like, just focus on your PhD, I was like, no, we have to do something on the ground because nothing's changing. And my PhD is not going to change anything either. If there's this literature that's in there continually showing psychosocial outcomes that are poor and that we need to do something, we need to do something, we need to do something, but nothing's actually happening on the ground, then we actually need to do more than just the research. So I started Through the Unexpected with a great bunch of people to build this not-for-profit organization to bring attention to all of this other stuff that happens when we receive unexpected news in pregnancy. And then I guess I finished my PhD and am still building a program of research in this space about, what parents move through when they receive such news, how the workforce supports people in that time, And also I am now also looking much more at the health policy angle as well, and doing a Master of Health Policy and Planning to be able to unpack that of what this space looks like now, in terms of the fact that a lot of advances have happened in this sort of technical, scientific tech space rather than looking at the psychosocial outcomes. So all of this combined is how I started in this space, and I'm continually learning and continually thinking about how do we make changes in this space that's going to, yeah, really bring attention to these really potentially profound experiences that parents go through. My long-winded answer.
Oh, there's so much in that. I'm thinking about what to ask next. I think I'm really curious about, I guess you had that really challenging experience personally that you went through, and then seeing it through the lens of also being a mental health nurse. And it sounds like you were really struck by the really significant impacts and the lack of support. Was your motivation to do your PhD, were you planning on doing a PhD anyway, or did you decide to do a PhD in this area because you were driven and motivated by your personal experience?
That's a good question, because actually I think my desire to go down, I guess, research space was after I took a few years of, I guess, clinical work and just out of my career, because my daughter's needs escalated. So that was probably outside of this specific space. I didn't know that I was so driven in here until I started that PhD. So it was just a topic that came into discussion with supervisors early on. And I guess I was looking at the rare condition space and then looking at the literature around that. And in from that, then this sort of prenatal space came into discussion. So it was actually probably through discussions, those early discussions, and then really looking at that literature and going, oh my God, it wasn't just me. This is actually a thing that we need to do something about. And I don't think I really, I think that was quite profound for me, because I hadn't expected it to be such a thing, because we don't talk about it in society. And we hide all of this stuff that happens. I think actually my PhD was driven by a different interest, just wanting to get into sort of research and move into where will I go in my future. And then it was really looking at that literature and unpacking it, and just seeing the gaps and reflecting on my experience, both as a mental health nurse. We'd never learnt anything about prenatal diagnosis or unexpected news in pregnancy, even though I was qualified to deliver non-directive pregnancy counselling and had done that extra training, which to get that Medicare item number, which back in that time was heavily focused on working with parents who were uncertain about continuing their pregnancy in that sort of early stage. Prenatal diagnosis and prenatal screening didn't even factor into that training at that stage. We will change that in the future. But back then, yeah. And so it was, despite being such a profound experience, I was quite taken aback by, the fact that it never even really come into my thinking and my work as a mental health professional. And that is something that we do also see in the literature that still exists, that it's not something that is on the topic of, or that works its way into qualifying degrees for things. It's more specialty. People get into it and develop skills of working with parents, either through lived experience. I'd say that's actually a major entry point for a lot of people, or through working with people in a really therapeutic manner where they have actually come and unpacked the complexities of their experiences. I think you can even work with parents who are receiving unexpected news consistently without actually really understanding it until you create that space for that openness in there where people actually share what's happening for them. Because I think our systems are designed that we see people for various reasons along the pregnancy journey. This is the news, this is this. But until you actually sit in that space, either informed by lived experience or really open, safe communication with parents who are going through these experiences, you just it's not on your radar.
Yeah, and look, I can resonate with that, because as I've been through prenatal diagnosis myself unexpectedly, and yes, living it, the impacts become obviously much more real. And as a genetic counsellor, I understood it beforehand, but it's different. It's different when you have to go through it yourself. Absolutely. So I guess just thinking about, you talked about that space, that prenatal diagnosis space, that really there is limited support and there are a few practitioners who really understand that depth of impact. If you could describe it, what would you describe as the experience? So in all of your work that you've done, whether that's through your research, through your work in unexpected, and I guess drawing in your personal experience too, what stands out about that experience?
I guess sort of key things that I can say stand out about that experience is that it the diversity of the experiences and how much of those experiences are hidden by assumptions, expectations, or ideals. The actual what parents go through differs because what who they are, what they bring into pregnancy, what their hopes and futures are, their own identity, their histories of pregnancy, their histories of families, there's just their whole worldview. So there's not any individual experience about how people go through this. And this was,
Mm,
I think that's probably the biggest takeaway that I ever want to share with anyone is that there's such a diversity of experiences in here because we also have a diversity of diagnoses, but even the same
mm,
diagnosis for two different people is going to be experienced differently. But one thing I guess I do say about this is that for many parents, unexpected news at that time about unborn babies' health, genetics, or development can be a profound life-changing moment where the news itself can threaten hopes and dreams for the future, can threaten the future family, can threaten one's own identity while grappling with these decisions about trying to find the right pathway, even when there may be no option that aligns with values. I think we have this sort of statement in the space that, oh, we just help people find the decision that aligns with your values. But what if there is none? What if none of these options that you're giving me on the table actually align with my values? But the news can also threaten the baby in the sense of the personhood because pregnancy can become very medicalized, whether parents are continuing pregnancy or experiencing termination for medical reasons or perinatal palliative care, the baby can be lost in that process. It becomes a medical thing then. The focus becomes about the diagnosis, not about the parents' transitions and the baby and the humanizing. I think so many parents have said to me before, we just need to humanize the whole experience more because it's taken away by the news because we focus on anomalies or deficits or abnormalities or all of these things that become the center. And that in that sense as well, then the transitions, the pregnancy or the parenthood transitions, what parents start as soon as they're even thinking about planning for children. They're already in this frame of mind of thinking about what does life with child look like.
mm,
So there's already this sort of parenting transition that's happening. And once we start just taking that away and we just focus on or we remove the humanity from that, we threaten that whole experience to be able to happen as well. Whether or not parents are continuing or not continuing with their pregnancy, that has been something that a lot of parents have shared as well. That loss of the baby, even when it comes down the line, if a parent has experienced termination for medical reasons, down the line, just not even acknowledging that baby's existence in the next appointments and things,
mm,
that loss of humanity, which again, the diversity of experiences, not everybody does necessarily want to do all of that. And I think it's really
mm,
important to keep that diversity in mind. But also when the news can then threaten your relationships with the care providers because of stigma or judgment. It can threaten your extended networks. Again, stigma, judgment, what you should be
mm,
doing, what you shouldn't be doing. You can feel like these conversations are unsafe with the support people that you have around you. And even that heartbreak that I've heard from mothers who have expressed this conflict if they are continuing pregnancy and when they're going in preparing for labor and they're sitting with this fear of what if I'm not enough? Will I love my baby enough? What if they do have a difference? And what if I can't love them? What if I'm not enough? Or the mothers that have sat there and telling you, how do you get over that guilt and self-hatred for thinking earlier it's okay if you pass and having those conversations with your baby at 2 a.m. that I can't make the decision to end my pregnancy, but it's okay if you do, if you pass. Then
mm.
how do you then bring a baby back into that? How do you rebuild that attachment? So that I think for me personally, one of the big things that sits in this space is this threat of what that unexpected news can mean beyond, I guess, just the diagnosis itself. And I Yeah. Brilliant.
Oh, there's so much in what you just said that resonates, both in terms of what I've seen for people that I've supported, also in my own personal experiences. So how does one support people in managing that sense of threat, however it presents? Because I know that threat is a core sort of theme or category in your research that you've published. How do we manage that from a clinical perspective? What do we know about what helps people?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I guess what helps people is probably the idea that, firstly, acknowledging that there may be this sense of threat in this space. So, understanding what that may mean then for parents, where those threats are, as I said, there's such diverse experiences. That experience of threat may be quite different for different people. So, being able to work out where that sits and what that's
Mm-hmm.
experienced like for that person, but also recognizing that the actual threat itself can trigger the defense cascade, the threat response that we have, the fight, flight, or freeze that we have. And we actually know that, yes, there's a lot of parents and a lot of mothers specifically. I say mothers because of, some of my research that looked at that specifically and the maternal experience. So many, and it was quite common that at that initial sort of point of news, that threat response was triggered. And some people really spoke of just going black. Everything went black. I couldn't form sentences. I couldn't process. I couldn't remember what they're even talking about. It felt like I was sitting outside of my body. I don't know that we necessarily recognize or recognize the impact of the potential for that threat response in the way that our systems are designed to communicate such unexpected news with parents. And for some people, like when I've in my research and in my studies as well, I can think of one couple that went to have, I can see even myself, went
Mm-hmm.
to go and have the first point where they were told the news was also the time when they were expected to make a decision about continuing or ending pregnancy. And I just think like when people are in that state of distress, if they are, again, diverse experiences, but if they are, that's just, we aren't supporting and understanding what impact that can have in terms of processing and being able to make decisions and being able to sit in spaces. And we absolutely do also need to acknowledge that threat response as well may be underlining what some people then experience as this sense of urgency. Okay, definitely, I have to do it right now. And sometimes we might respond to that sense of urgency in a sense of urgency. Okay, we'll get you in straight away. We'll do it. But while that might be the right thing for some times, acknowledging that sometimes that decision can come from that threat response, and that means if we do act immediately on that, we've lost that chance for that person to actually be able to slow down, process, memory make, do all the things that they wish to do. And then sometimes we can sit in that space of decisional regret, all of this other stuff. So I think the first point is recognizing that there is this potential threat in here. I know that we use the word shock a lot in the literature. There's a lot, oh, this person was shocked or this person was shocked. But I think we need to unpack what actually,
Mm.
what is it in that? Because it's more than, for many, it's more than just, oh, okay, we'll just take a day to think about it and come back. it's destabilizing on many different levels, or threatening, yeah, people and who they are and how they see themselves in the world and all these sort of big, profound aspects of our life and our identity. Yeah.
And when you explain it like that, it makes perfect sense, right? It makes perfect sense how profound this would be. It's about life and death. It's about people's expectations for how they would have a family and challenging those expectations. Sometimes those expectations have existed for most of their life. And when you step back from it and you look at it and you go, this is really a very profound time. And I think it really resonates with me when you say that we don't really have the systems that are set up to support people through that. And so it sounds from what you're saying, it's about recognizing that threat response is happening and acknowledging how destabilizing it is. And like I often would observe as a genetic counselor that, for many people, and this is an observation I would often see for people who get an unexpected result in their first pregnancy. Often people haven't had anything up until that point that's happened in their lives that is particularly challenging. So they've gone through a fairly usual life trajectory. and they haven't had anything come up. And this is the first time that something comes up that's really big. And so they also don't have that lived experience of navigating a really big life challenge. And so in addition to it being destabilizing, it's another layer because it's that first time. And I guess part of the reason why I wanted to draw attention to this space is I feel like we don't give that enough emphasis and we don't understand it enough. And then I love thinking about how do we help people respond to that? How do we create a space where we're recognizing and acknowledging the threat response and the significance of it? And we're creating a space where we can get people or work on getting them to a more regulated state so that they can make those decisions. And it's interesting when you were talking because I was thinking about in genetic counselling, often results end up being issued on a Thursday or a Friday. And so often, and this is not intentional, it's just how samples process through labs and when lab staff are issuing results. And so often as a genetic counsellor, you'll have that result, that unexpected result that you know is going to have a big impact and you have to deliver it at lunchtime on Friday, the worst 4:00 on a Friday. And you feel this guilt that you can't, you've got the weekend ahead and you can't get anything in place in the meantime. But actually, time and time again, I've found that when people have that weekend, so they have that initial response to the news and they have that weekend, it can give them just a bit of time to sit and process it before reconnecting on the Monday. And I guess that's like an unintentional structural element where it's actually allowing that threat response to them to process the threat response in one way or another. But yeah, I'm interested in your thoughts on how practitioners working in this space can provide more support to people, not just around recognizing the threat response, but in responding to it and helping them respond to it so they can come back to a more regulated state and then start to think about the next steps.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. And I guess I do flag, I guess, the threat, I guess, that I refer to is the threat response, that an initial distress or triggered aspect of it is very important. And it even pops up again then when people are returning to clinics and things where they may have had unexpected news earlier. But it is also just one of the portions of the threat that I like to keep in mind, because there's also people that the news may not be the most challenging part of the experience. The
Mm,
news may be their histories and their perspectives and their lens on the world. The news may just be news that then they need to process and reorientate and move forward with. And so for them, it may not be the threat response because of the news, but the threat actually comes in different ways, where you go to the next appointment and there's
mm,
assumptions that this is what you're going to do, this is what you're going to do, this is what you're going to do, or this is a terrible thing, how devastating that you could have this, when for that person, that's actually not that's not then the diagnosis or the news or the chance of a diagnosis is not necessarily the bit that triggers the threat response. And I guess I just want to flag that because
mm,
I think if working in this space and open and wanting to do the best for for the people that you're working with, I think it really starts with listening to what the person's bringing at any one point in time. If we just assume that everyone's going to be in this state of distress because of the news, or we're going to harm other people already, it's acknowledging threat that exists in many different multiple ways, so that then you can have the curiosity in mind to think of, okay, what's happening for this person who I'm seeing, so that you can ask and check in and inquire. The amount of parents that tell me, do you know what? Nobody even asked how I was doing in
mm,
the experience. But that's going to be the first key to actually being able to meet that parent where they are and provide what they need. And that might be that they are sitting in this acute space of distress, actually need support to be able to, yeah, just, I guess, regulate in that space. And there are a whole bunch of skills associated with that probably sit beyond this podcast. But it also may not be that's what you need to focus on. It may be that there's a different thing that comes up for those parents. And so I think the key point to be able to support people in this space is actually listening to what they're coming in with and what they're bringing in with. And I guess ideally preparing in terms of reading things, but acknowledging that whatever in their notes as well, what they bring in on the day may be quite different to what's there as well, and being able to adapt to what the person's bringing in. And that's how we're going to reduce more threat down the line, because we can adapt what we're providing to parents and meeting them where they are.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's about recognizing that this can be a really profound and destabilizing time, but not making assumptions about whether that is the case for whoever is sitting in front of you in person or virtually. And also acknowledging that a threat response can come at any time during the process. So it could come at the beginning, but it actually could come further on down the track. And so being
Absolutely, yeah.
open and aware and understanding that. So talking a bit more about down the track, because I think often we focus on the initial point of information, whether that might be something's come up on ultrasound or there's a genetic screening result that's come back showing an increased chance. And then there's the process of being offered prenatal diagnosis and going through the process of prenatal diagnosis. But the experience extends much further than that. And you referred to that a couple of times earlier when you were talking about your work. I think there's a gap there in care. We provide care in that initial space around the diagnosis, but what's needed as the experience extends on, and how far does the experience go?
Yeah, good question. How far does it go? I have parents that I connect with that received their news 15, 20 years ago that look back and think, gee, I wish that I had more support around me, because I can see how I just carried that for so long. Or I think because these experiences can be so profound, maybe it is always going to be with some people. And maybe, like they talk about grief, it's not something that you get over, but it's something that you carry better, probably not the best word to say, but something that becomes part of who you are and how you navigate the world, and you learn to walk alongside with it. And I think for many parents, that's what happens. We know from one of the studies that does talk about, higher trauma levels at 10 years post unexpected news. We don't have any sort of systems and supports and structures that support people beyond even the diagnosis. And then it becomes dependent on who you're seeing, what your postcode is, what you can afford, what you can pay, what you can find, even how good you are at navigating systems and services, and how well you can advocate, and your own health literacy and all of these sorts of things. We don't have sort of national structures of support for people beyond, the testing. In fact, it's really the testing that we have the funding for the test, but no actual pathways of support beyond the test. And the people that are working with parents who are experiencing these profound life changes are recognizing that the ways, or are trying to do the best with what they can in terms of using non-directive pregnancy counselling, which wasn't designed for this, using better access mental health plans, which wasn't designed for this, trying to fit into the systems that have continually overlooked that beyond the test experience. Did I just go off track of what you were asking?
No, and I so love that you brought this up, because it's one of my key gripes that I like to get on the soapbox about too, which is what we're seeing is increasing access to funding for genetic testing in Australia, which is amazing, but it's being done by Medicare, and Medicare funds the test and it doesn't fund the services and the supports that we know need to sit around it in order to responsibly and ethically deliver care. And so it's creating an increasing gap. And then added on to that is we don't have good funding access for genetic counsellors. So we have genetic counsellors in tertiary public hospitals, but we have a real gap in terms of being able to access genetic counselling out there in the community, because not everybody needs to be referred to a tertiary public hospital. And so we really need some funding models to support access to genetic counsellors, but not just genetic counsellors, other health professionals that can provide support in this space. And I think, so this weaves beautifully into the next question that I was going to ask you, because earlier on you mentioned the fact that testing technology is advancing and it continues to advance rapidly. And it's advanced substantially in this space over the last 2 decades that I've worked in it. And sometimes I think, oh gosh, could we just pause for a minute so we can all catch our breath before the next wave of technological advances come in? But we often talk a lot about the technologies and we have to adjust and adapt rapidly to the technologies, but we talk far less about how care is actually delivered. And so I would love to hear what you think from what you've learned so far about what good models of care look like when someone's navigating prenatal diagnosis, and what we need to be aiming for to get that good support, and also what the outcomes could be if we did have the good support.
Good question. A couple of years ago, when I first stood on my box talking about this stuff, and I had the opportunity to meet with an MP and talk about it, that it was like, okay, what are we aiming for? What's the solution here? I was like, oh God, I don't know. This needs to be something that many minds, much more bright than mine, come together and talk about. But I will have a crack now. A few years on, I've thought about it a couple more times, so I can prepare. um,
Great.
but really, what good models of care are going to look like is that good models of care are going to be equitable. It's going to be designed that anybody, no matter their health literacy, system navigation amount of money, can actually find the support that they need. I know I'm talking about ideal here,
Yep.
but we have to keep equity in mind in the long term. And good models of care are going to be the ones that adapt to what the parents bring in, because they're going to be being able to adapt to what parents need and being able to have that time to listen and support parents to even unpack what they need in that time is going to be the way that we're going to reduce the threat, is the way that we're going to reduce the significant PTSD that we see in the literature. Some studies are showing between 40 and 60%. These are really high incidence of these poor psychosocial outcomes that people are carrying. But if we can actually support people at that time and in the time that follows when they're still processing, because a decision and the pathway of through the unexpected doesn't stop at the decision point. There's so much processing and time and energy and space that's needed beyond whatever that is. If you're continuing pregnancy, it's navigating all of those, this new sense of uncertainty that's hanging over your head about what the future is going to look like and what supports look like and all of this stuff. And if you do experience termination for medical reasons, then it's still in this space of uncertainty. Am I going to become a parent? Do I have another chance? How do I sit with the love that I had for my baby and then even potentially think about another baby? Or am I a horrible person for thinking about another baby? There's still so much processing that happens after that time. But the model of care that we really want to see then is going to be one that adapts to what that parent needs, whether that be continuity of care, because we often talk about how important continuity of care is. But in this space, I'll also flag that it's not going to be the be all and end all for everybody, because some people, if they do experience trauma in this situation, their best care is going to be potentially provided by another person because they might want to avoid particular professionals, avoid hospitals, avoid clinic rooms, avoid, the space where they've heard the most devastating news of their life. So any type of model of care, it's all I can come up with. But the most important thing is going to be that it's going to be able to adapt to what that parent needs and adapt to their changing needs as well. That's as good model as I can come up with.
So accessible, flexible, recognizing the what can be profound psychosocial impacts, and available over time to allow for people to process in the time frame that works for them.
Yep, absolutely. Yep. And that time frame thing, it's an interesting thing because it's coming up in some of the other research that we're doing as well. At that point of news and in that turmoil of decision making and all of the time there, sometimes it's a really interesting time because sometimes people are offered mental health support. But even the way that it may be branded as mental health support, or you can go see a psychiatrist, or do you want to see this? It doesn't necessarily align very well with what the parent might be experiencing in that time and prioritizing in that time. They may recognize things like, if you sit there and unpack, what's happening for you. Oh yeah, I'm awake at 2 a.m. and I'm scrolling and I'm having nightmares and I'm having all this. Being able to sit and unpack that may be a better way for them to be able to recognize and even think of maybe that the support that they need at that time. But if we're just asking someone, do you want to go see this person? It's often actually declined at that point in time. And then when we've spoken to parents down the line, they're like, oh, I wish I did, or why didn't I, or I should
Mm,
have reached out. But sometimes, even if it is offered, it's just not offered in a way that maybe works through the distress that's going on at the time for that person, then it is accessible or on their radar or something. So then a lot of those people who may have declined or didn't even, for many, it's not even flagged as a thing. Then down the line, it's, yeah, I need to see someone. And we've seen that both working with parents who have continued pregnancy, who have experienced perinatal palliative care, although those who have an actual perinatal palliative care team seem to have some nice moments of being held,
mm,
supported, and parents who experience TFMR as well, that whatever care we have, we need to be able to make it accessible for whatever time point they're coming in and when they're recognizing and when they're open. But also recognizing that in that, train of thought, that care at that point in time might look different to what's happening at the other time. If somebody is in that sort of acute stress, it may be about really that holding space. And down the line, it's that more rich therapeutic
mm.
processing, that type of thing. So yeah, any one model of care needs to just adapt to all of. I'm not asking for much.
I think it's all super interesting. And I was thinking, because also in light of wrapping up this conversation and drawing it together, is what can practitioners right now take away? And listening to you talk, I wonder if it's about one, fully sitting with what the impact really can be and acknowledging that and thinking about how they can weave more opportunity into their care to talk about the impacts, but then help their patients to identify what they need, and also share with them that their feelings will change over time and they might need different support over time. So getting people to think about what type of support they might need. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? What can people do right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's going to be key, but also we don't necessarily want everyone suddenly then trying to go into deep and meaningful conversations with every parent that they see at every point, because there needs to be the space and the time to create a bit of safety in that relationship. So if I would flag that, I guess, if the appointment times or the systems and things don't allow for that space and time and curiosity, then maybe it is about passing to someone who can provide that and being mindful about, yeah, even how that is worded. But I guess just thinking of what you guys are doing in the space where you actually start with a conversation and just hearing from the person, that is the stuff that helps create that sense of safety. Oh my God, I'm seen and heard in this
Mm,
space. And I can actually then start to that. Because for some parents, that's not going to be in the appointment where they're being told what's happening as well about the baby, because there's, for some, as I said, diversity, but because they're so focused on what's the information for the baby, because they want as much, some people want as much information as they can because they think that it's the information that's going to help them find the right thing, the right thing to do. But actually, for so many, it's the processing, it's that making that meaning from that information that is then the part that actually does reduce the threat, does help people find which way to go for their next step, does let them take another breath, does ease up the nightmares and the things that they're wrestling as well. It's that space to make the meaning from the information. So I think, in some appointments, acknowledging that these are going to be heavy information, baby, medical oriented spaces. And maybe that's not always the best place to start sitting and unpacking stuff. But maybe there needs to be some way to then make sure that people know that there is a support that is going to be able to have some of these conversations and do that unpacking with you as well. Because we also don't want it to be that rush. Well, if you're not coping, you can just see this person or something. It just doesn't, yeah, it doesn't work that way.
yeah, absolutely. It needs to be thoughtful and considered
Mm.
and paced.
And flagging that realistically, or normalizing the fact that, yes, sometimes different people can experience this news in many different ways. sometimes they can find that they're not sleeping well or not eating well or struggling with these things. Like, really, the more you can ground some of those things, the more people can actually sit and recognize it then. And people have found it. Some parents find it really helpful to do this and this. It's really that sort of, some parents, these are options, and normalizing the fact that, yeah, you can have a whole lot of emotions happening at this time, and it's okay for you to take the time to actually
Mm.
sit and unpack that for yourself as well. Yeah. I think there's a lot. Obviously I can just
Yeah,
keep talking about
I
this stuff.
know. I think we're going to have to bring you back for another episode. But I think that's, yeah, just given such a rich and detailed picture of the experience of prenatal diagnosis and the importance of thinking about what the impacts are and importance of thinking about how we're delivering care and being creative about how we deliver care. And yeah, I guess I'll also just throw in at the end a little plug for what we're doing at GenoCare, because we're exploring how we can utilize the expertise of amazing perinatal mental health nurses. So who used to be midwives and now mental health nurses working in this space, and looking at, can we create that space for that processing and that meaning making and that adjusting and that adapting. And so that's something that we're looking at. And so far the feedback's been really positive, which is really lovely. So I've learned lots about mental health nurses and the amazing skill set that you guys all have. So I'm very grateful for what you guys bring to it. So thank you so much, Peter. It has been awesome having you on board. We will definitely have you back.
All ranting.
Fit us in. But yeah, very much appreciate your input.
Thank you for having me. Always happy to, yeah, do some ranting about this space. And yeah, thanks for all you are doing in this space as well.
Right.